Star Trek Defiant is a new series from IDW Comics that follows the adventures of the titular ship under the command of Captain Worf. A spin-off from IDW's mainline Star Trek series, Defiant follows Worf and an unlikely crew, consisting of half-human, half-Klingon B'Elanna Torres, Starfleet turncoat Ro Laren, Data's evil positronic twin, Lore, and, most surprisingly, Ambassador Spock. Under Worf's command, the Defiant crew breaks from Starfleet to hunt down Kahless II, the clone of the Klingon god, in hopes of preventing a galaxy-wide war and rescuing Worf's son, Alexander Rozhenko. Star Trek Defiant features art from Angel Unzueta, colors by Marissa Louise, letters by Clayton Cowles, and writing from Christopher Cantwell. Christopher has not only written Doctor Doom, Iron Man, and Hellcat series for Marvel, but also a number of television and film projects, including co-creating Halt and Catch Fire for AMC. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for having me.
First question is just, how'd you get involved in this project?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, it's funny. I started in comics. I think I started working in them in 2017. I was already kind of knee deep in television, and I had a comic project. It was an original idea, and I had the good fortune to pitch it to Karen Berger, who was just starting her own boutique imprint, Berger Books, in collaboration with Dark Horse. So I got that off the ground, and that book was called She Could Fly, and it was like a very personal book and a lot of fun to put that together. And it was my first foray into that. And from there, those jobs kind of parlayed into the next thing, right? So from there, I did another book with Karen. Mike Richardson really liked the way those books turned out, and he knew I was a big Mask fan. So, because we were talking at San Diego Comic-Con, I ended up doing a little Mask run with him. That was great, and Patrick Reynolds. And then Will Moss at Marvel pinged me one day, I think a year and a half later, and asked me if I wanted to do a short story for War Scrolls, which was the kind of compendium piece to the big crossover event, the War of the Realms that Jason Aaron and company were putting together. And it was really like a book that was like, what are the other people in Marvel 616 doing, right? And I said yes to that job before I even knew who the character was. I was so excited. And it turned out to be Doctor Doom. And that parlayed into me getting to pitch on the Doctor Doom book, which I did with Tom Brevoort and everybody in the Avengers office. And we got nominated for an Eisner for that, which was amazing. And got to work with Salvador LaRocca, which was an amazing opportunity. And then, yeah, so I mean, it's just kind of jumped from here to there. I bring all that up only to frame it as I never actively like harangued anyone to write something, except IDW for Star Trek. I was always emailing the editor at IDW, whoever it was at the time, and being like, would love to do some Star Trek. I mean, like I was always that guy in your inbox for Star Trek. But I got to know Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly fairly well. I first became aware of them as a fan because they were writing, along with a great writer's room with like Jody Hauser and a couple other folks, Star Trek Year 5, which was drawn by Stephen Thompson. And it was just this genius piece of Trek everything. It was like everything I wanted out of Star Trek. It bridged the series to the movies. It was so elegantly done and with such love and care. They were just such masters of that book, and I loved it. And so I got to know Jackson, I think, online first, and then then I think he and Colin checked in with me because they pitched and did a Kang book for Marvel, which was great, which preceded Quantum Mania. And Kang was kind of the second hand in my Doom book. And so we were trying to like make it cohesive, and which was cool. They didn't need to do that, but it was great. And then lo and behold, they were putting together this big Star Trek line with Heather Antos. I think this is kind of like her brainchild, she was very instrumental in doing something similar for Marvel and Star Wars, which was, let's make the comics matter. Let's make the comics cohesive. Let's make them interlock. Let's make them canonical to the story. And that line right now is fantastic. I got to play a little bit in that world last year and do an Obi-Wan book, but Heather came over to IDW, and it was really kind of the same mandate, but for Star Trek. So she went to Jackson and Colin, and they put together the book that I think internally was called Star Trek No Colon for while they were developing it, right? There was no subtitle. Yes. So I'm the first colon book that spun out, right? So they literally were like, the story's going to grow from here. And then as things branch out 5 issues into Star Trek, and Worf has a falling out with Ben Sisko, and he strikes out on his own, that'll become Star Trek Defiant. And they had a bare bones framework of that put together, and they reached out to me. I think Heather and then Jackson kind of in tandem, and then I put together, I gotta maybe put the meat on the bones and said, what if it was kind of shaped like this? And I came up with what if it was kind of, the Dirty Dozen in the Star Trek universe, right? Where, Star Trek is very much boldly go, strange new worlds, high-minded sci-fi concepts, all of the things that make Star Trek, someone is killing the gods. That's the plot of the Star Trek book. That's very much the plot of our book, and it still is all those things, but it's also kind of rough and tumble and irreverent and fun, and so that was where the idea of let's make a crew that has no uniforms, let's put some villains on the crew, you know what I mean? Like some opportunists, and play with the moral gray areas of the universe. And so yeah, that's how it came about.
That's wonderful. So before we go too much further, can you kind of give us the quick summary of what the IDW Star Trek world is like? Because unlike Star Wars, Star Trek's always had a little bit more loose relationship to its secondary material or extended universe material. But the IDW universe is fitting very, as you kind of said, building directly off the TV shows and the movies, and has its own interlocking universe. For somebody who has only seen the movies and the shows, what do they need to know to jump into Defiant?
So for Defiant, I mean, I think that, yeah, I would say that first and foremost, I think that the new Star Trek comic universe, Colin and Jackson identified a time period in the Star Trek timeline, the prime timeline, and they created what is, at first glance, a sequel to Deep Space Nine, but it is in spirit also a sequel to Next Generation, and basically almost a sequel to all of the movies of Next Generation except Nemesis. Nemesis is kind of the end point of our timeline. So that's when everybody gets back on board the Enterprise, and they all go up against the clone of Picard, played by a young Tom Hardy. And that is kind of the end point. And the beginning point is it's like the aftermath of the Dominion War from Deep Space Nine. So that was the big culmination of Deep Space Nine, was this huge galactic conflict that involved everybody. And these are the kind of the pieces that are left over, and what's everybody up to now. So, but then I would say it's also dealing with, what are the Voyager folks up to a few years after getting back, and all the fanfare and my God, they've returned is over. What are they doing? And then it's touching on the original series with Spock, with Scotty, with some of the other kind of more clever concepts that Jackson and Colin have built into the books. It's even tying in stuff from this thing I mentioned earlier, Year 5, which you can get now in a collected edition, and trying to pull that into canon as well. So it's kind of like that wonderful 90s yore that we all loved off of Trek. It's it's riding that high, but we're touching everything. I mean, there's references in my book to Strange New Worlds, Discovery. Shax from Lower Decks is coming into the Star Trek book, and what's great about that is we get to see him artistically done differently than he is on the show.
Oh, that is
right?
Fantastic.
Yeah, he's gonna, because this takes place, oh God, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it's he's on special assignment, and he ends up on the USS Theseus, which is the ship from Star Trek, the comic Star Trek that's going right now. And so Shax shows up in and we're doing a big crossover event this summer where the books will interplay, and there'll be one big story. We get our own kind of crossover issue called Day of Blood #1, which is like our Infinity Gauntlet #1, right? And Shax is in there, so I got to write Shax.
Oh, that is
I got
so
to put
cool.
Shax and Spock together. Like that's insane. You know what I mean? So it's like it's everything. So if you know a little bit about Star Trek, that's enough to get you in somewhere in these books, because it's really like the way we joke about it is like it's like fantasy baseball, but for like Star Trek. You know what I mean? It's just like let's put Hank Aaron on a team with Cody Bellinger and Mike Trout, and they're going to be managed by Babe Ruth. You know, and it's like, yeah, let's do that. You know.
Yeah, as a reader, that's the real pleasure of the series that I wasn't expecting going into it. It's just seeing these characters interact, and Star Trek has a long history of fan fiction and that sort of thing, and not to knock that at all, but you're not writing fan fiction. Like these feel like these are, I can hear them in the actors' voices. These feel like the natural extension of the characters just bouncing into each other. And right there in the first issue, we've got that a exchange between Spock and Worf, who are two that I'd never really consider bouncing off one another, talking about smashing a computer, and it's such a delight. So did you come in with your list of these are the characters that I want? I want B'Elanna, I want Lore, I want Ro, or were those given to you?
It's kind of both. So it was like Jackson and Colin put the pitch together. And by the way, I should say that one show I forgot to mention is Picard. And what's great about Picard season 3 is we're able to maybe bridge some of the what was up with so and so in between Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, the movies, and Picard, right? So it's like we know where Worf shows up. We know where I don't want to spoil anything, but like where Ro shows up. Like, so what was going on with them? And we can actually build out their relationship and the kind of act 2 of their relationship, because the act 1 of Worf and Ro was they didn't quite get along. And then the last thing that was supposed to happen between them is he was coming down planetside to arrest her. And Riker let her go, right? When she decided to turn against Starfleet and join the Maquis. So the last time they were supposed to talk to each other was like, I was going to come arrest you and you're going to be court-martialed. And then we see them in Picard in a completely different dynamic, right? So we get to fill in the middle, which is awesome. So the characters, Jackson and Colin, it was always Worf. Worf was going to come into what we call the flagship book, right? Star Trek No Colon. And he was going to come in, and then he was going to splinter off. And it was really like a book built around the freighted nature of his captaincy, because that's always been a question with Worf in terms of his promotions, his insubordination, his record versus his loyalty and duty, all of that stuff. He's of divided worlds, right? He's an ambassador for the Klingon Empire, by story end, all of that stuff. So always Worf. They always had Spock coming in. That way they wanted Spock to come in. They wanted the 2 ambassadors to take over as captain and first officer on the Defiant. They had B'Elanna in there. But I then came in with Ro and Lore, and that was who we were going to start with. And then there's a third character that's an original character. So there are original characters populated in both books. Colin and Jackson have created a Vulcan named Talir, and then Ensign Sato, who is an Andorian, and I think a distant relative of someone from Enterprise, which is awesome. So it goes all the way back. There's a character in mind that is a Orion pirate, like an Orion medic / like drug dealer. Taking a page out of the original like Harlan Ellison script for City on the Edge of Forever, where he wanted to have a drug dealer on the Enterprise. So we, she comes in, this issue comes out on Wednesday, so I feel like I can talk about it. Like we start to meet this other character. So there's a character coming in from there. But what's great about her is that the Orions that you see in Defiant is that they're more in the vein of the Orions from the animated series from the 70s, which is great. So it's kind of a nod to Discovery, And then it's also like Angel went and drew perfect Orion pirates from the animated series that integrate really well with our photorealistic cast, right? Like it's amazing. So yeah, so I brought those characters in, and what I liked about Ro was Ro has a certain history with the Maquis, and Belana has a certain history with the Maquis, and they're very different. So that immediately sparked some good drama for me between the two of them in terms of how they see each other and their relationship to the separatist movement, right? Where Ro was a spy and then went over to their side, and Belana started in the Maquis and then became acting chief engineer on a Starfleet vessel, right? So like they flipped. So they have very differing opinions on each other and their histories in Starfleet and in the Maquis movement. So, it's all the fun interplay in there, and it's been announced, but eventually, and it's even teased in the first issue because she's in some of the data pages in terms of correspondence she's sending to her prefect. But Commander Stela is coming in. It's Tasha Yar's Romulan daughter, so we're excited about that too. So yeah, and I wanted to have a spectrum, right? So you got like you go Worf, like Starfleet kind of golden guy, although he's had his marks against him in the past. Spock, whose legacy is secure, is like platinum forever. Belana is a little bit in the middle, right? And then you go Ro, and then you start to get to like this pirate character who's been operating like kind of in like chaotic places, and then you go full like lore and Stela. And lore was my biggest swing. I was like, I want to try to do lore. I'd like to bring lore back too. And obviously there's Picard has some endpoints for lore as well, so we get to fill in the middle for him, play with that. So all of that is coming, but I wanted to make a spectrum of like hero to villain, and then see them all kind of make questionable choices and have their perspectives kind of shift and evolve over the course of our story, which has been really fun.
Yeah, it's a real delight to see. I feel like a lot of Trek writers do like to walk that line of, putting Starfleet ideals or Federation ideals into pressure, and see, in the pale moonlight from DS9 as their kind of lodestar, and sometimes that can veer a little bit too far into look what evil stuff Section 31 is doing. One of, again, the great pleasures of your book is that I feel them pushing that and questioning it without full on dark side, we're going to compromise all of our morals. And for me, one of the great, my favorite scene comes from, since you've already mentioned it, I feel like I can say it, comes from issue 2, where Belana and Ro are sniping at each other about their allegiances to the Maquis. And I think that's a perfect example of what you do so well, where these characters are coming from a point of principle and their own set of ideals, and that doesn't always work with Starfleet, but it is consistent among the characters. And I think that's such a wonderful line that you walk there. How did you stay on the right side of, how did you avoid going too dark, which some Trek writers sometimes do, and I think you've avoided really well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and it's interesting because it's funny because I mean, Section 31 does show up in issue 2, which is, it has like a little bit of a cameo appearance, and we get to build out that world a little bit, and its connection to lore. But for me, there are certain kind of, I wouldn't say bylaws, but more like principles, where it's like, I liken it to characters like Superman or Captain America, which for me is Marvel's Superman, right? Which they're paragons, like Steve Rogers, and by extension, I think Sam Wilson, and then Kal-El or Clark, like you can't. It's interesting. I mean, you can play with anything and go any direction and make something interesting, but there's a identification with the character that there is a real sincerity and pureness of virtue in them. And what I think where you get drama and conflict with Steve or Clark or Sam is, and I've had the pleasure of writing both of them, is that, actually all three, but is that they make a choice that they wholly believe in, they believe is right, and someone else disagrees. I think, and that's a Aaron Sorkin principle, which is, it's very interesting to just take two characters with opposing perspectives and have them go at it. Like that's the basics of it. And so for me, Starfleet and the Federation have a paragon quality to them. I think that's important because that's where it started, right? I think what Roddenberry laid out from the very beginning in the original series is that this is a utopia in a lot of ways, right? That this is a utopic vision of the future. It is a beautiful vision of the future. It is a vision of the future not shared by everyone who populates that future, which is great. So there you get the conflict, there you get the drama. But the idea that the Earth got worse before it got better, which is always the kind of harrowing thing, which is like where you are now is actually the nice, soft, cushy seats. It's going to get real bad when we do the World War III and the eugenics wars. Then you can come over here when we eliminate currency. And it's interesting. It's like, I think even like Roddenberry knew, and like those guys like Gino Kuhn and like DC Fontana knew, like you had to push humanity through a really intense crucible, and then you'd get something really pure on the other side, which is Starfleet, which is the Federation. And yes, I think there is obviously that kind of like Ben Franklin critique and Thomas Jefferson critique of the institution that is very much alive in Star Trek throughout from the original series on. You get the occasional like misguided admiral, you get Jellicoe, who is a real asshole, but not wrong entirely, right? Like you get Nechayev, you get some of that, and even some of the Section 31 stuff. It's like it's akin to CIA agents who are nation building, going, we believe in democracy and spreading it throughout the world. So like, but it starts from that kind of pure seed. So it's always that. So Defiant is still much in that world. And like Jackson and Colin are that's where they are living. We are having our characters, people who have like flirted with both sides of that line of like not agreeing with that utopia or accepting it, and having them come against the boundaries of that utopic vision. And that's where you get the Orion pirate sector. That's where you get Section 31. That's where you get, the Tal Shiar. That's where you get organizations that are built. That's where you get our main villain and antagonist. It's where you get Kahless the second and the corruption of the idealistic progressive vision that Worf had in Next Generation to put this guy on the throne in order to provide spiritual guidance and vitality to the Klingon, ethos, and it's soured, right? So like that to me is like, and again, that's Worf with the best of intentions. So Jackson and Colin joke about that Worf's decision to do that and to convince Gowron to bow to the clone of Kahless. That's like Worf's Bernie Sanders moment. You know what I mean? Where it's like, you know what I mean? It's like Worf was like, this is gonna work. And like you're like, yeah, that could, and it could have easily worked. And it did for a while, but also sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's where you get to play with Star Trek in terms of what's good, what's bad. And I think in my book, just by necessity, Starfleet especially has to have a little bit of a school principal voice to it. I think that in the data pages of my book, which are when the comic book term like back matter, right? Like it's these graphic design pages. It's so much fun because you get to fill out the story a little bit, build out these things. I put a lot of Starfleet like missives in there, like alerts in terms of what our cast is up to. And I've developed, I feel like, a Starfleet voice of like, you're going to get in trouble. You know what I mean? Like one more and you're going to be in detention, where it's like, but it's less like the principal in Breakfast Club. It's not like the truly bad, like Paul Gleason character. Like, unless you're writing Jellicoe, which, maybe we will, like,
About to say, is that a hint? Is Jellicoe showing up at some point?
but it's more like Skinner in X-Files, right? Where he's like, God, my wife and I joke about Skinner in X-Files all the time, where it's like him just like having drinks with a friend and being like, I have these two people who work in the basement and they make my life a living hell, like everything is terrible, but he's ultimately on the side of good, right? So like that's kind of Starfleet's presence in Defiant, is like they're slapping our characters on the wrist left and right, and they're kind of wagging the finger, but They're the rigid authority that we get to buck against, but we're doing it in a playful way, not like this is so messed up. Now we get to kind of have characters say that if it's like Ro or B'Elanna when they're talking about being in the Maquis, being like, this is what Starfleet gets you. It's an empty promise. It's this, because those characters actually believe that. They rejected the utopic vision, right? So yeah, we get to, it just depends on whose perspective you're in.
Yeah, and that's so much fun. Like you mentioned, bringing those Voyager characters back to see, you know, it's one thing for B'Elanna to reintegrate into Starfleet when they're off in the D quadrant, but now that they're back here in the A, seeing how they and she's still got that spark inside of her. And I love that little bit that you have in the first issue where Tom Paris calls in, and you nailed his voice and is simultaneously stepping in it like every husband does, but also saying exactly what she needed, you know, what he needed to say to her, only for it to get cut off by Worf. Can you tell us a little bit about, was it your idea to have Worf break off from Cisco, that rift that they have there, or was that given to you and something you got to play with?
That was Jackson and Collins. So they really built out this idea of the premise of the book, and the flagship book is someone is killing the gods, meaning someone is killing the most powerful beings in existence in the Star Trek universe, right?
Which, what a brilliant idea. That feels like that was just sitting there on the table because you have so many godlike characters in Trek, and then you bring back a god killer. It just seems so obvious.
It's been so good, and to have it be the clone of a man who was considered a god.
Yes.
Whose premise as a god was kill all gods.
Yes.
Jackson and Colin are like poets in the Star Trek universe. They're like Homer, you know, with the author. Like, let me tell you a tale. Like I really love the way they do that. But and I don't know if you I don't know if you know about the Star Trek. So Star Trek 400 was like the 400th issue of Star Trek that IDW did, and it was a preview of this book, of the flagship book. And it's only a few pages, but it's Gary Mitchell.
Right.
And it's Gary Mitchell as God.
Yeah.
And this is a story about God killers. And I can't believe Trek let them do what they did in that. I hope it's in the collected edition at some point, because it's brilliant. But yeah, it's like everybody from Gary Mitchell to Q to everybody like that. But the idea that Worf and Cisco would fracture was very much baked into their concept from the beginning. I think that stems back to their differing perspective. Talk about two guys with differing perspectives, and Deep Space Nine. And I think that they actually see things a lot more similarly than maybe they would admit. I think Cisco is much more of a kind of brash, cutting through, the rigid authority figure, especially like in later seasons. Worf is that too, but he can tend to hide behind duty and loyalty and rank and responsibility. He also self-flagellates a lot more than I think Cisco does, which makes him fascinating to me. So when I came on board, I think we built out the specifics of why they splinter, and it's really that Cisco is charged by the prophets, who are, gods in the Star Trek universe for all intents and purposes. He is their emissary, more so than ever because he's now out of the wormhole. And he has a kill shot on Kahless, and Worf discovers that his son, Alexander, everybody's favorite Star Trek character, is on board and has joined Kahless's movement, right? So from that moment on, it became the high-minded principle, the macro of the mission: stop the murderer from killing the gods, save the structure of the universe, to the human cost, and human being the operative word there, but like the mortal ground level cost of cult-like fervor, overzealousness, violence, a lack of purposelessness, and people who find meaning in something violent, right? Like, and my God, there's my son standing on the bridge, right? Like, and why is he standing on the bridge? Probably because I was a shitty dad, and what's great is we get to do Cisco. Cisco's been a shitty dad too. Like, he was like, see ya, Jake, and went into a wormhole forever, maybe, so he comes out and Jake's like, what's up, man? Like, I don't know you. Like, and we get to do a much more high contrast version of that with Alexander and Worf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because Worf's relationship with Alexander, you talked about them being paragons. If there's one place that Worf failed at, he is the worst father on television. And so how did you, it seems like you have a little bit of a reclamation project potential there to kind of show us a side of Worf as a dad.
Yeah, I think, and it's something that, the series, some of the stuff with them is really striking. And I actually, I know I made a joke about Alexander, poor Alexander, but like I like him, like from when he's a precocious little kid. I mean, if Worf is of divided worlds, right? Like he's raised by humans after his parents are murdered for a long time. And then there's a brief moment where he thinks that his parents were traitors, or at least his father, right, Moke? Alexander is so divided too, because he actually has human blood in him, because Balar was half human. But like, man, Worf, and listen, I have 3 sons. And I talk about this all the time with my wife, that it's like, sometimes at the end of the day, all you're hoping for is like a net gain. But it's like, I'm guaranteed to screw up 6 today. But if I maybe do right a little bit more, the needle will tip a little bit more in my favor, as not having just damaged these children, but provided them some guidance and something that will help them, right? And love. Worf is the dad who's like, I really identify him, where he's like, I identify with him where he's like, in that episode with Balar, he's like, look at your mom, like,
yeah,
murder, like, look at her, never forget, it's just like chill, like, got a lot of Klingon baggage. Yep. He's got a lot of Worf specific baggage.
Yep.
And he's just like dropping that in that kid's lap, and then being like, go play in the Arboretum on the Enterprise.
Go take a mud bath with Lwaxana. And
exactly. Like, and it's like, there's all kinds of stuff like that. And I thought they actually did a pretty great job in Deep Space Nine to show how confused Alexander was.
Yes.
As an adolescent. And we're really trying to just continue that story. But this is going to be a referendum on both Sisko and Worf as dads, right? Because it's a referendum on them as captains, which is really rich metaphor as a father figure, right? Like, Sisko is a very kind of mercurial and polarizing captain. Worf has never quite gotten that chance. In Defiant, he's a rogue captain with a stolen starship. And Sisko has even point blank told him in Deep Space Nine, you'll never be captain. So I think like that is really the interplay between that and father is happening a lot. And then you've got Kahless, who is supposed to be the father of the entire Klingon Empire, and he's not doing a good job either, A lot of that at play. Daddy issues, always.
Kind of along those lines, I don't want to spoil too much, but in some of the later issues that I've read, Worf isn't always the most effective captain in the world. Is it hard to write? I mean, I'm guessing you're someplace around my age, which means you probably grew up watching these characters. Is it hard to kind of separate the fandom and be like, this is not a character I want to worship? As a good writer, I need to treat them as somebody with feet of clay. And how do you approach that?
Well, I think it's a fine line to walk, right? Because ultimately, like, my thesis statement for this book is that Worf is an awesome captain. Like, and that's where he's going. Like, right. But it's about the journey, not the destination, right? Like, the biggest hurdle, I think, is he's got to overcome is himself. Right. And I think that we'll get there. And I'm actually working on some of the stuff that's happening post crossover right now. And it's like, what is it like when Worf settles into that chair? And we do know that he gets the pips. Like, I think that, like, Metalis just confirmed that, like, that when he's in intelligence in Picard, he's a captain. But to see him in a chair with a ship is a whole nother matter. And I think that you want to see missteps, but again, it's always about he's making the right choices, and any misstep might come from a second guessing or a valid perspective, but the wrong way to go about it, external circumstance, pressures from outside. I'm proud of the fact that, like, that what's nice about what Jackson and Colin handed me, which is like, here's a Klingon captain and a Vulcan first officer. Wow. There's your full spectrum of the emotion, right? But what's been nice is to play them both as very smart and very capable and almost an inverse of that at times, where from the moment Worf approaches Spock, he's very aware that his emotions are probably clouding his judgment because of his son being in danger. And Spock, we talk about how Spock's logic is not necessarily at this point empirical logic, but like Spock's logic. Like it's like the world according to Spock. And Spock is so smart that he can maybe justify anything to himself and to others. And how that may get the characters into trouble at times, right? And that later on I referenced that Worf has read Spock's book, right? The Many and the One, right? Which we see I think in Picard. So like Worf is learned and Worf is studied, and Spock is assured, and we know Spock is emotional. Like we know it's there, even in his old age. Like like that kind of tireless persistence when it comes to reunification and then the saving of the Romulans. He's so rogue. He's probably one of the most, if not the most, rogue character in Star Trek. Commits mutiny like twice. You know what I mean? Like he's that guy. And he's supposed to be the one that's most trusted, right? So I really love just like taking those characters and you can, what's great about the different alien species is you can take the conventions and the stereotypes and then subvert them and say like, well, but watch this. Like if there's a Klingon that shows up that's a brilliant scientist. And it's a character that is, I don't want to spoil it, but it's from the shows that people might have forgotten about. But it's like, no, here's a guy who has some breakthroughs that no one in the Federation did, that Data has trouble comprehending, that Lore has trouble comprehending, that Spock has trouble comprehending, and he's Klingon, right? Like doing that is what's cool about it.
So I'm going to ask a spoilery question since you just mentioned Lore again. And you said that Lore was your big swing character. Kind of the traditional Lore plot is he shows up, he says, hey, trust me, we all trust him. And then he smirks as he betrays everybody. And at least by the end of issue 3, that's where we're going. When you wrote that, is it, do you feel like as a fan, you've got to hit the Lore plot points, and then where do you get to kind of come in and put your own spin on it?
Well, I think that, yeah. So again, there are certain characteristics of these characters that you want to be loyal to.
Right.
Right. But I saw today, like I already got dinged in some review about Lore being too soft in issue 2. And I'm like, just chill out. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same thing where it's like, I always talk about this where it's like, you get a good 5 or 6 minutes of space fighting in Star Wars, but then you spend about 35 minutes in the desert. Like more patient folks in the theater at the time, it's the person that goes like, wait a minute, I thought this movie was called Star Wars. Like, what are we doing in like Tunisia?
Yeah.
It's like, well, just wait. So I think comics are funny, right? Because they're just so instant, and they're meant to they're written to be read on the subway.
Yeah.
And then tossed in the trash as you walk out. And people are like, what? So it's like a long play stuff, I think sometimes is troubling. But with Lore, this is to go like super granular into him, because I love him. We first meet Lore in Data Lore. He's mischievous, and obviously he does some really serious stuff in that episode. And then he tries to feed the Enterprise to a crystalline entity. But he's more of like after that, he's more of like a wayfarer, and like kind of he doesn't like Data. And I think that Data has a tendency to kind of take him darker, but it's really rooted in this place of insecurity and jealousy and all of this stuff. Who is the superior one that Sung built, right? And when he shows up again, when Data finds Sung, he still has that kind of wayfarer quality. He's kind of like, he just kind of shows up. He's kind of like the first version of Lore is like he's like a bandit from like a Kurosawa film, where you don't know what the guy's gonna do when he walks into the tavern. Like he might kill someone in cold blood, but then he might like get you your money back at the bar. You know what I mean? Like he has that quality to him. The thing that switches him is that in that Sung episode, he takes the chip that is meant for Data. And Sung says, don't do it. I built that for Data, not you. And he goes, fuck you, Dad. And he puts it in his head. right? And like the next time you see him, he's a sociopath. Like he's full bore, like he's gone, man. So that to me was like, it gave me enough grist where it was like, well, we know that Data pulls the chip out after descent, right? So were he to turn on again, well, now we're looking at the shade that was before the chip, right? And that, what does that shade of lore think of? I'm gonna pal around with the Borg lore, right? And there's that conflict in him. And so I think what I was trying to do in terms of trying to make the character as rich as possible was go like, have him not be clear-headed for a little bit and go, well, wait a minute, like I had that chip and that chip made me do some bad things. But then Laura is really quick to blame everything else other than himself. And so it easily can become an excuse of like, oh man, that chip, I'm glad you took that chip out. I'm feeling great. How's everybody doing? Right? Like, but he's still Lore. And I think what you saw by the end of 3 is like, he's still that bandit that walks into the tavern and you don't know, right? And I think he doesn't know. And again, going back to that idea of like writing a legitimate perspective and a sincerity in the character, like it wouldn't be as interesting to me if he was like, he's like, I'm going to pretend to be good the whole time. Fooled you. Like, I'd rather have the guy wrestle with some stuff because he did, you know, he has really complicated feelings for his brother, as we just saw in Picard, right? I mean, incredible thing that was. And the thing that, you know, I don't want to, the piece, the coup de grace in that move between him and Laura was like perfect. And it so vulnerable and emotional, one of the most vulnerable and emotional things about Data, right? And like, so like now, so we're finding Laura at like a crossroads in my book. And it's like, and again, he opens his mouth and you just don't know if you can believe him or not. I mean, he's that guy. And like, you know, he will have a trajectory, but I hope it is one that is unexpected and also earned and also sincere, where you don't feel at the end he goes, aha, you know, like it's not that. It's like, it's a guy working through some stuff and going, who am I? And why am I so angry all the time? Because I still am, you know, he definitely is. It's just going to take him a minute, you know. I mean, shit, he doesn't even have legs in episode.
That's right. It's just the head.
Slow roll, but it's coming, you know, because he's an important character on the board for us in both books. Yeah.
So I got to ask, since you've mentioned Picard a couple of times, did you know what's coming down the pike, or is this just I don't know? Your book lines up so well with this season.
We're being very careful. Yeah, like so. The process was really nice. I will say that the Trek story group has been incredible with us in terms of guidance and kind of shepherding and encouragement, and also how open they are to a lot of this stuff. Heather Antos, our editor, has been our liaison with the goings on in the larger Trek universe. And so through her kind of, you know, Section 31 like connections, we didn't, you know, they weren't handing us scripts for that show because that show was under a tight lid because of how it's still like Star Wars, it's the same thing, right? But she had she was in certain cones of silence, and then we would maybe be in a writer's room at IDW offices at Sherman Oaks or on an email chain, and we'd be like, oh, you know, it'd be cool. What if this? And Heather would go, I would maybe not do that. And why? And she would be like, I can't tell you, right? And then sometimes we go, you know, it'd be really neat. What if we did this with Lore or Ro? And she would go, you know, that actually might be really awesome because it might work with something that's coming. And we say, what's coming? And then she would say, I can't tell you, right?
Oh, man.
So you would do stuff like that and play with it. And but she was really good. She kept it under wraps, but she would give us the thumbs up, thumbs down, and kind of, you know, steer the rudder without blowing the entire season of Picard for us, which was nice because we got to also watch it. And then I watch it and go, oh, thank God we didn't do the thing. Or I'm glad we did that, you know. And also the Trek story group would look at us and be like, well, you know, we have some things with Lore and this and so, but this works. Like this will actually be kind of nice. So, and now with more insight as the show kind of unspools, we're able to feed into that even more, you know, which is good. And even, you know, because I'm only in issue 2, so like I can touch a line here in issue 3 and be like, oh, it's even more intentional, and like in 4 and things like that. So yeah.
All right, one last question, then I'll let you go. Since you've done, you know, you've written Marvel characters and now you're writing Trek characters, if you could do another Marvel Trek crossover, like a Planet X Part 2 sort of thing, what would you like to see?
Those are so weird. You know, it's funny because like,
Yes, they are.
you know, what's amazing too is when they bring in Alex Ross, who he did all of our covers on Iron Man, which was like I couldn't even believe it was real.
Yeah.
But like I got Alex Ross to do Frogman, which I'm really proud of. But like Alex will do these crossover covers, and it's like Luke Skywalker fighting like the Battle of the Planets characters, and you're like, what? But it looks real, you know, and you're like, it's amazing. God, a Marvel. What, you know, I feel like I don't. Maybe you get in trouble for saying this because of Mattel or whoever it is that owns the rights, but like I feel like you got to bring like ROM man, like Space Knight stuff, right? Like have the Space Knight world cross into Star Trek, and that could be kind of awesome. Or if you want to do like super high contrast, do like, you know, like I don't know, slapstick, you know, like
right, yeah,
the bridge of Sulu's Excelsior, you know, like it's like what? You know, like,
messing with his tea. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just something really weird. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, Christopher. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. The book is excellent. I've enjoyed every issue and really, especially now, excited to see where it goes. So great job. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.